Welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today, we're going to be talking about some current affairs. We're going to be doing that via a discussion of this book, Who Really Feeds the World, by Vandana Shiva. Now, this book talks about the agricultural industry and its negative impact on society. And it just does a full body research analysis and socioeconomic reflection on just the agricultural industry and what it's really doing to the world. The fact that we still have a world hunger, even in America, we have hunger is a significant issue. The fact that a lot of farmers are not making ends meet. We have all this technology. We use all this science, agricultural science, and agricultural businesses produce food at such a huge scale, such a massive scale. And, the impression they give off is that they're feeding the world, that they're providing more nutrition to the world because of their science and the huge scale of their production. But in reality, they're doing a poor job of providing nutrition to humanity as a whole. The agricultural industry, which Vandana Shiva calls agribusiness, that's a big term used right now. It's it's becoming detrimental to society, and she compares that to agroecology, which is what she feels we should be heading toward. And I agree for the most part, and I would encourage you to read this book because it really delves deep into the negative impact of the agricultural business and the agricultural industry, and it's well researched. There's a lot of sources and a lot of fact finding that's done here. You can look all that up. If you don't buy into her argument or if you're not impressed, I would encourage you to check it out and read it. Personally, after looking at the sources and reading what she has to say, I agree with what she's saying. This video isn't really going to be a debate about whether the agricultural industry is more destructive than it is constructive. That's not really a debate, because I think that there's enough evidence and research out there that some basic research and a little bit of time, any reasonable person can come to that conclusion. And again, I would encourage you to read this book. What I want to talk about instead is more looking at it at a philosophical angle, looking at it as to why is it that we do so much constructive things as human beings. We get caught up in these activities that ultimately are destroying us as a species, really. Why do we continue to do that willingly? Is it naivete? Is it ignorance? Well, that's part of it. But the thing is, oftentimes you'll have entire branches of science and entire branches of mathematics and just a lot of professional industrial knowledge is put into the activities. And it gives off the impression that these things are actually good when they're not. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about why is it that we as a human society justify destructive behavior that ultimately destroys us as a species. Why do we do that? I think Vandana Shiva brings up a really good point as to why we do this. She breaks down a good explanation, a philosophical explanation. So I want to share that with you. So let's read our first quote from the book, shall we? All scientific systems are framed by knowledge paradigms. This is also true for the science and technology used in agriculture. Technological tools for food production do not exist independently of the knowledge paradigm of which they are a part. And the sophistication and sustainability of an agricultural farming system is dependent on the sophistication of the knowledge paradigm that it governs. So the first thing to understand is what is science, right? What is science? Or what is an ideology or an enterprise or a school of thought, right? These things are tools, right? They're tools. Science is a tool. Science, a practice, an enterprise, right, is not inherently good or bad on its own right. You can't really say science is evil or science is good. It's the way it's used. It's the use of it. That's what you call good or bad, right? So you can create science, very sophisticated science that it can be used to do bad things. And vice versa, you could create sophisticated science to do very good things. It's all about how you use it. Sometimes we make this mistake that we put all this science into something and we immediately assume that it's legitimate, like it's being put into good use just because there's a lot of science behind it. We gotta put an emphasis on how it's used. That's really what determines the meaning behind the science that we're actually using. Traditional agriculture and organic farming have their roots in several strands of knowledge, which are collectively recognized as the emerging knowledge paradigm of agroecology. So Vandana Shiva uses this term, knowledge paradigm, which is basically a frame. You can build a huge amount of science under a knowledge paradigm or a frame that is destructive ultimately. It's all about how you frame what you're doing. During the industrial agricultural revolution, these traditional knowledge systems were replaced by a militarized way of thinking that promoted violence toward the earth. So that's the frame that science is being used under, a militarized way of thinking. The discussion about who really feeds the world is first and foremost a discussion about which knowledge paradigm is a better guarantee for sustainable food production. Sophisticated, sustainable systems of both thought and food production have always existed. Humanity, after all, did not start eating in contemporary times. How then did we arrive at a situation where the Green Revolution is basically when agricultural companies or corporations started getting heavily involved in farming, the feeding of society, and industrial agriculture displaced and destroyed systems that have nourished humanity over millennia and substituted the knowledge of ecological agricultural systems, agroecology, with the tools of warfare. Today, what we generally refer to as science is in fact Western, mechanized, reductionist, modern science, which became the dominant practice of understanding the world during the Industrial Revolution. It has continued as a dominant paradigm. So science is put into a frame that directs it into a particular area. Now, that area, that focus, Vandana Shiva is arguing is a destructive focus. The science is being directed in a destructive way. Now listen to this. To shape the industrial system in the form of new violent technologies, and to shape the capitalist system in the form of a new profit-driven economics, a certain type of science was promoted and privileged as the only scientific knowledge system. Okay? The first is a Newtonian Cartesian idea of separation, a fragmented world made of fixed, immutable atoms. This understanding of the world sees nature as composed of dead matter, a Lego set where immutable particles and pieces can be used, moved, and substituted without any overarching consequences. Newtonian Cartesian theories have been proved to be false by new sciences such as quantum theory, ecology, the new biology, and epigenetics. What Vandana Shiva is saying is that, of course, we now know that the work of Isaac Newton, his rules that he discovered in terms of how the universe works, they break down. When you get to the quantum level, that Newtonian ideology breaks down. And the Cartesian way of thinking, like Descartes with his fixed point system, that breaks down too, because when you get to the quantum level, you begin to notice particles exist in more than one place at a time, or that subatomic particles are not fixed. They move about all the time. And this is what Vandana Shiva is saying when she's talking about these things have been proven false. And, Isaac Newton and Rene Descartes, their science, their knowledge that they developed, isn't necessarily bad, but the way it's framed and how it's used to justify the way agricultural science does its practices, this is being done in a destructive way. We're using that old school Newtonian Cartesian science in destructive ways. We're building off of massive knowledge bases and sciences off of that. And we're forgetting that not only are these abstract sciences that were developed long ago, not only do we begin to notice that they are in fact false when you get down to that reality of it, but they're being used to justify destructive practices. Life does not evolve through competition. Rather, life evolves through cooperation and self-organization. 50 trillion cells cooperate to create the human body. Millions of species cooperate to shape ecosystems and the planet. The Darwin paradigm of competition has fueled the industrial agricultural paradigm. The whole idea of natural selection, survival of the fittest. What Vandana Shiva is saying is that people, or science, as it relates to the business, agro-business, puts too much emphasis on that aspect, and it doesn't focus on the other reality, the other part of the natural world, the ecological part of the natural world. The reality is the world is actually interconnected, and living organisms are dependent on one another to survive. Absolute competition is ultimately destructive. There's a lot of cooperation and interconnectedness and working together that keeps all living organisms alive. And agrobusiness uses specific aspects of the knowledge that Charles Darwin developed, specific areas to legitimize what they're doing, and they're not putting emphasis on other areas of science. This ecological truth is forgotten in the dominant knowledge paradigm because industrial agriculture is based on eco-apartheid. It is based on the false idea that we are separate from and independent of the earth. It is based on a worldview that defines soil as dead matter. If soil is dead to begin with, human action cannot destroy its life. It can only improve the soil with chemical fertilizers. And if we are masters and conquerors of the soil, we determine the fate of the soil. This false idea that we are masters and commanders of the world is just not true, because we're actually dependent on a lot of systems that the world provides for us, like fertile soil. It's not that we human beings make the soil fertile, it's that the earth creates fertile soil for human beings to farm off of. We're dependent on the earth to provide us with fertile soil, and that's the reality. But we're caught in this false knowledge paradigm that has us believe in this reality that isn't true, and we create whole sciences and businesses and industries based off of this false knowledge paradigm, and is ultimately destroying us. It is time to make a paradigm shift from the militarized mind, which sees all species as enemies to be exterminated, to a worldview that sees humans as part of an earth family, and that recognizes pollinators and friendly insects as our co-producers in the food web. Vandana Shiva brings up the whole business of pesticides and just destroying pests, animals that supposedly interfere with the growing of food. But in reality, we need these living organisms because they're part of the ecology that grows the food, right? That ultimately provides the nutrition that's needed to make the food healthy. The current agrobusiness knowledge model, the science that's built around us, is framed in this idea that humanity is separate from nature, from different living organisms that also interact with soil and plant life. But in reality, we are all interconnected, and we need each other for nutrition and healthy living. Corporate control of seed that has eroded biodiversity is a result of a paradigm of production based on uniformity and monocultures, what I have called monocultures of the mind. That's Vandana Shiva's terminology, and it's a pretty good descriptive title. A monoculture of the mind imposes one way of knowing, reductionist and mechanistic, on a world with a diversity and plurality of knowledge systems. These knowledge systems include the knowledge and expertise that come from practice, experience, and working with nature as a partner, the knowledge of women and workers, and of farmers and peasants. These knowledge systems are multiple and diverse, but as ecological biodiversity is replaced by monocultures of food and crops that can be commodified and patented for profits, and as the rich diversity of food cultures is being replaced by monocultures of junk food, the human mind is also being reduced to a monoculture. Monoculture of the mind, rooted in a reductionist, mechanistic paradigm, create a blindness to the diversity of the world. So again, a lot of science that's used for business, particularly agribusiness, is rooted in this foundational idea that we as human beings are separate or above nature, that we need to conquer nature or manipulate nature to reap its benefits. And so a lot of science is created with that idea in mind, and all of this knowledge fools us into thinking that it's legitimate, when in reality that whole idea, that whole notion that science is founded on is false, that we are dependent on nature and other living organisms for our health and for our nutrition. They are needed for our very survival, for the survival of humanity. So that's what Vandana Shiva is talking about, biodiversity. We have to understand that different kinds of biology, living organisms, they're all needed, and we need to be partners and work together, cooperate with these living organisms for our benefit, for our survival, instead of trying to conquer or go above and be just one superior organism over lesser nature. It's just not true. And that's why we're dealing with world hunger and economies that aren't balanced, where we have a few people with a lot of money, corporations, businesses, and common people, farmers, growers, the workers that grow the food, they're struggling financially. They're not able to live healthy because the knowledge paradigm is not acknowledging the importance of interconnected living, of biodiversity. That whole reality is ignored. The paradigm shift we propose is a shift from monocultures to diversity, from chemical-intensive agriculture to ecologically intensive agriculture, from external inputs and internal inputs, from capital-intensive production to low or zero-cost production, from yield per acre to health and nutrition per acre, and from food as a commodity to food as nourishment and nutrition. This shift addresses the multiple crises related to food systems: falling incomes for farmers, rising costs for consumers, and the increasing levels of pollution in our food. So we got to remember, things like science or religion or business or economics, these are just tools. They're just tools, right? They're not inherently bad or good. It's the way that they're used which provides the meaning, the morality, if you will. You can create entire branches of science, right? But that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. You can invent really sophisticated systems or machines or equipment, but that really doesn't mean anything on its own. It's the way it's used. If you create a sophisticated system or industry or machine and is ultimately used in a destructive way, then that's not a positive thing. We get caught up in this notion that we look at the world and we see all the science and sophistication and information and data or machinery, and we think, oh, this is good. This is humanity progressing, and it's this is legit. Look at how we are advancing as a society. But if you're still looking around you and you're seeing pollution or world hunger, or first world countries dealing with hunger, or the actual growers of food, the working class struggling to make ends meet, then really that science is not useful, it's not good, right? In the sense that it's not being used in a good way. So we have to remember that. We have to remember how we use ideologies and knowledge bases and enterprises and practices. How are they used? Because it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter how sophisticated or intense or complex these systems are, that doesn't really indicate anything. The important part is how constructive they are to society, to humanity, to the world. That's the important part. If you want to learn about agrobusiness, if you want to learn about agroecology, check out Who Really Feeds the World by Vandana Shiva. And also consider the ways that we use science and knowledge in other enterprises and industries and ideologies. Are they really benefiting the world? Or are they ultimately destroying it? You've been watching The Black Ponderer. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.